The European Union has banned funding to any Israeli institution operating in the occupied territories. Some have described the decision as an earthquake. But how significant is the EU move? And will it help or hurt the stalled peace process? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Mike Hanna. The European Union has issued guidelines this week that for the first time will ban dealing with Israeli institutions inside the occupied territories. The new directive means institutions beyond this line, which marks the point of disengagement after the 1967 war, will not be permitted to deal with the EU. The line, recognised in international law, defines the boundary between Israel and the occupied territories, which include the Golan Heights and East Jerusalem. The new guidelines will cover economics, science, culture and education. Grants and scholarships will be the main type of funding affected. And any institution wanting EU financial support will have to sign a clause stipulating that it operates solely within the country's pre-1967 borders. What the guidelines don't cover, however, is trade. Well, officials in Israel are angry about the EU's decision. Here's some of what Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu had to say.
As Israel's Prime Minister, I will not let anyone harm the hundreds of thousands of Israelis living in Judea and Samaria, the Golan Heights and Jerusalem, our unified capital. We shall not accept any external dictates on our borders. This issue will be decided only by direct negotiations between the two sides.
Well, for more on this, I'm joined by my three guests. From Jerusalem, Yishai Fleischer, a radio host of his own show, the Yishai Fleischer Radio Show. From Chicago, Ali Abu Naima, founder of Electronic Intifada and a fellow at the Palestine Center. And from London, Ian Black, Middle East editor of The Guardian. But first, let's go to Sandra de Waal. She's the deputy head of mission at the delegation of the European Union to Israel, and she joins us from Tel Aviv. Welcome to you. Now, what exactly do these guidelines mean?
Maybe I can also start saying a few things what these guidelines do not mean. As you mentioned correctly, these guidelines do not have any impact on trade between the EU and Israel. What these guidelines do is actually they put into writing a policy that has been very long-standing from the European Union. As you know, the European Union does not recognize Israeli sovereignty beyond the Green Line, beyond the June 1967 lines, and therefore has had a long-standing policy of not providing funding for any kinds of entities or activities that take place beyond the Green Line. So the policy in se is not new. The fact that the rules of the game have been put down in writing is what is really new.
Well, why you say there this is not a new policy, but it has been in practice under the veil, so to speak. Why the decision and why the need to put it down in writing, something that has clearly angered the Israeli government greatly?
Well, the reason why it now needs to be put into writing is that political decision that was taken in December 2012, which I think was born mostly out of, I believe, a growing sense of frustration in Europe about settlement, the continued settlement expansion. I think that is the most direct link that can be made. Again, as I said, the European Parliament has asked for the European Commission to make sure that that decision is translated into practice. The first upcoming reason for that is to make sure also that EU-Israel agreements and funding, EU funding towards Israel can continue the way it has been, but while the rules of the game have become very clear, because there has been concern and criticism within Europe that some of that funding actually did benefit entities beyond the Green Line, and therefore there was the need was felt to put that into writing.
Would this be correct to interpret this as a warning to Israel of European nations' frustration with the failure of the negotiations to get any form of traction, and particularly the obstructive role that settlements play in these attempts?
No, I wouldn't push it as far as that. I don't think there is a direct link between the deadlock in the peace negotiations and this decision. This is actually a very technical, I would say even bureaucratic implementation of this political stance that was taken long-standing and most affirmatively in December 2012. But there is no direct link with the deadlock in the peace process.
Sandra Duval, thank you very much for clarifying that particular issue. Let's now return to our guests and begin with Ali Abu Nyama. We've heard there what the EU spokesman has to say. Do you think that this is the beginning, perhaps, of a new muscular approach by the EU?
Hi, Mike. Well, I would hope so, but I think there are reasons to be very skeptical, although we need to really be clear about what's good about this decision. You heard the EU representative being very careful to downplay it, to emphasize that trade is not included. And so, indeed, this decision is somewhat limited. We have to remember that for decades, the European Union has been quite happy to be complicit in Israel's violent colonization of occupied territories. And we have to remember that that colonization has been declared by the Security Council to be a violation of the Fourth Geneva Convention. And what that means, in effect, is a war crime. The settlements are war crimes. People who aid and abet the settlements are and should be treated as war criminals. So in that context, this European move is very small, very little, and very late. But to the extent that it starts to send a message and provide real practical steps to start drawing a line and rolling back Israeli criminality and land theft, then I hope it could be a positive sign. But there's still a lot of small print to understand about whether it will really do that or whether it's really just an attempt by the EU to deflect pressure from the European public that is becoming sick and tired of their own government's complicity with Israel's colonization and abuses of Palestinians.
Well, Yishai Fleischer in Jerusalem, do you see this EU directive as a warning to Israel?
Well, I see it as the continuation of the same old policy of trying to have Western powers get in the guts of the Middle East, trying to change the map again. And they drew the map badly back then. They're trying to draw it again. And I think that we should push them out and tell them the reason you're frustrated is because the Oslo process has been one big failure, yet they keep trying to push it again and again with the Americans as well. And I think the time has come for the end of the two-state solution and now beginning of conversation and discussion of a one-state solution where Arabs live with freedoms and equalities in the state of Israel, with clarity about the borders of the state of Israel. And I think we're really pretty tired, all of us are tired, of hearing foreigners trying to tell the Middle East what to do. I think it's time for them to go home.
Well, clarity about the borders of Israel. We heard that phrase there, Ian Black in London. This is the fundamental basis to the entire discussion, is it not?
Yeah, I think that's right. It was interesting to hear the representative of the EU indeed downplaying the significance of the decision. What this is, it seems to me, is a bureaucratic process set in motion by a political decision that was indeed made and announced last December. And the clear intention, and it's made very explicit, is to say that there is a difference, a distinction between the State of Israel and the territories it has occupied since June 1967, 46 years ago. Now, making that explicit is intended, in my understanding, to raise awareness that internationally the situation is untenable and to raise the prospect, initially not very frightening, of the cost of maintaining the status quo, of maintaining the occupation, rising. And I think that explains the really quite strong reaction to this in Israel. If we were to take at face value what the EU representative said, you wouldn't really understand what the fuss is about. The description of this in Israel as an earthquake and necessitating a special appearance by Prime Minister Netanyahu, I think underlines that this is a fundamental and important point. A significant section of the international community in the form of the European Union with 28 members and 400+ million people saying there is a difference, and we want to remind you that the State of Israel and the territories it occupied are not the same thing. And I think it is a significant move that goes beyond the small print of what is inevitably convoluted, complex language that you would expect from EU guidelines. It's not easy stuff to read, but I think the political message is quite significant.
Well, there's an interesting reaction from a former Israeli Foreign Minister, Shlomo Ben-Ami, who actually welcomed the move, saying that it clearly delegitimizes the occupation, not the state of Israel, something that he sees as very important. Yishai Fleischer, I want to put that point to you. You are speaking of a one-state solution, I take, and I heard. However, that issue of a directive which is clearly delineating between the state of Israel and the occupied territories. What is your view, by the way, of Shlomo Ben-Ami's reaction to it?
Well, I think that this directive really delegitimizes the Europeans and all those that claim that the ancestral tribal lands of the Jewish people, that we have no connection to it. I think it's really, ironic. I live, for example, nestled between two Arab neighborhoods, one called Atur, the other one called Ras El Amud, and I live next to the Mount of Olives, and the Mount of Olives has 3,000 years of Jewish graves on it. They're marked. Anybody that says that we don't have a connection to this land can't stand up to any scrutiny, any scientific scrutiny. So we have a connection to this land. Trying to shrink our connection and our future here hasn't worked so far. It won't work. All it's done is actually create barriers between us and our Arab cousins who live in this land as well that we need to share with them, and it has not been successful. I really think that this program and our discussion would do well to start moving forward. I really think that this European directive is just part of this regressive effort to try to partition away a land, to try to make a wall down the middle. I mean, who partitions countries anymore or cities? The last time we tried it is in Sudan. That's not working out so well. It's just not something that's done today, and I think that it's regressive and not progressive, and we have a more progressive vision which will give Palestinians rights, normalcy. Businessmen will be able to trade, freedom of movement, and all we're looking for is the end of sedition, and also we need to give Arabs a more normal life, and I think that process can move forward. Maybe some people in the Israeli government are starting to see it that way, and I think that it's time to move past this, and this is just same old, same old.
Well, let's just go immediately to Ali Abu Nyama to respond to a couple of the statements that you made there, Yishai Fleischer.
Mike, it's so interesting, and I have to say somewhat amusing to hear the settler that you were speaking to try to adopt the language and the mantle of equality and progressiveness and a one-state solution, when he himself has admitted just now that he lives on stolen, occupied land in occupied East Jerusalem, land taken by force from its Palestinian people. And while he talks about giving Palestinians, he doesn't use the word Palestinians, he refers to Arabs in this very generic way. He talks about giving them rights. The violent theft of their land and their homes in East Jerusalem, in the very colonies where he lives, is going on now as we speak. And the European Union, which is so insistent on making this distinction between the occupied West Bank and so-called sovereign Israel, has said nothing, as far as I know, about the ongoing ethnic cleansing of tens of thousands of Palestinians within the so-called Green Line. And when I listen to the settler speak about biblical claims, a biblical a justification to steal other people's land and property, I'm reminded of the fact that at one point in humanity's dark history, white slave owners used the Bible to justify the ownership of other human beings, to justify slavery. And we have these extremist settlers like Mr. Fleischer claiming that the Bible gives them the right to bulldoze their way into other people's land, other people's olive groves, other people's homes and living rooms, and take them, and then come on here and give us this sob story about how they just want to live in peace.
Well, if I may just interrupt you there, Ali Abu Nyama.
And that's why the whole world is against them.
Well, let's just go to Ian Black at this particular point. We see there the heightened emotions certainly arising out of this particular issue, which are nothing new. But Ian Black, the fact that we are having, for the first time from the EU at least, a piece of paper which is making a statement which before was just nudges and whispers in a way in terms of relationships with Israel. This is a stepping up of pressure, is it not, regardless of how much is being done to try and downplay it?
Yeah, I think it's part of a trend that has been growing in strength in recent years. It is the official policy of the European Union that there is a distinction in international law and its own outlook between Israel and the occupied territories. That is an awareness that I think that has grown in recent years. It reflects, certainly, it's fair to say, I think, a sense that the European Union, which has all sorts of aspirations to be a player commensurate with its size and economic weight on the world stage, has not managed to have much of an impact on what you could argue, we've just had evidence of it in that last exchanges, is the most intractable conflict on the planet today. Europe takes positions, it pays a lot of money, it's been supporting the Palestinian Authority, it's been, as is often said, a payer but not a player in terms of the Middle East peace process. What it's done now is to codify the detail, fairly legalistic but important, of the view that it takes in the big picture of that conflict, and it reflects a trend. It also reflects, I think, European governments responding to some extent to pressure from their own populations. Some of this has come, the EU representative mentioned this, from the European Parliament. There's a sense in the wider movement for in various European countries, for example, the demand that settlement products be labelled, the call for boycott, disinvestment and sanctions, that from below, from ordinary citizens, the status quo is untenable. And I think we're seeing the European Union respond to that. I note
well,
that
if I may just interrupt you there, Ian Black, apologies, but let's just take a step back and take a look at what this issue is all about. Settlements have proved to be a major stumbling block in negotiations between the Israelis and Palestinians. So let's give you a little background. Settlements are Israeli communities built on Palestinian territories beyond the 1967 Green Line. That's the border that's often described as a basis for a Palestinian state. They're dotted all over the West Bank and East Jerusalem, and they're home to some 520,000 Israelis. Settlements led to a system where Palestinians and Israelis effectively live under two sets of different laws on the West Bank. Palestinians insist the settlements prevent them from eventually having their own state. But for many Israelis, settlements are an ideological necessity and also serve defense purposes. But despite international criticism, Israel has intensified its construction of new settlements. This, many contend, is a major obstruction to attempt to forge any two-state solution. Well, recently, President Obama was in Israel and in Palestine. He made very clear, Yishai Fleischer, that there is no debate about the connection of Jewish people to the area in which Israel now exists. However, importantly, he did not invite to an event that he had at a university in Jerusalem representatives of Ariel University, which is beyond that green line. This created a great deal of opposition. But the point simply is that even a US president recognizing the rights to the land made the point that the occupied territories does not mean part of that land. Your response to that, Yishai Fleischer?
Well, Mike, I think that's not a big surprise. That's been American and European policy to try to get into the business of the Middle East for a long time and draw the lines here. I'm not so concerned about what an administration says or the Europeans say. You've said it yourself. There's over 500,000 Jews that live in what we call Judea, what you call the West Bank. There's a reason for that. We're not trying to land grab. If we wanted to land grab, we'd go live in Brooklyn, okay? We are doing very well here in the Middle East because we feel connected to this land. Now, Abu Nima may not agree with it. That's fine. But we self-identify as the indigenous people of this land. And if you want to converse with us and start moving towards the path of peace, I wouldn't just alienate people like myself and call them the settler. I would say, hey, Palestinians have a chance to sit down and actually talk and negotiate about the future, a normal future.
Well, let's go straight, if I may, straight to Ali Abu Niama to respond to that particular point, Yishai Fleischer. Ali Abu Niama?
Yeah, I mean, Mr. Fleischer is a settler living on land illegally occupied by Israel in the War of 1967. It's not his land. And just because he feels I mean, I could feel a connection to anything. It doesn't give me the right to go and grab it and then say, but I just want to live in peace. The whole world understands that Palestinians are being forced off their land so that settlers like Mr. Fleischer can enjoy it and have swimming pools and lovely houses. Right now, as we speak, tens of thousands of Palestinian Bedouins are being forced off their land in the Naqab, in the south of present-day Israel, in a process that's been going on for decades. And the European Union has been aiding and abetting this and dragging its feet. I mean, this step that we're talking about, that this program is about, yes, it's a small step, and if it's a move, as Ian Black says, towards tougher policies, then good. But the reality is that Israel has been getting away with this for years and years. Palestinians are being driven off their land. Farmers are having their land taken away. Communities are being divided. People are being besieged in enclaves with walls around them. The chutzpah of a settler like Mr. Fleischer living on land stolen from its people.
Well, if I may, Ali Abu Niama, if I may just go back very quickly to Yishai Fleischer at this particular point, and just ask a question. Do you think that all Israelis feel like you? There are many, it would appear, who actually welcome this EU directive in terms of clarifying what is Israel and what is occupied territory, relieving pressure of Israel itself.
Well, Mike, thank you for letting me respond to that. First thing is that the land that I live in was actually purchased from Arabs, because here in our region, we're actually able to buy and sell normally, and that's a fact. Now, what Abu Nima doesn't really know, maybe living in Chicago, he doesn't actually deal with the people that I deal in, day out, Arab businessmen, my neighbors, who I speak with regularly because I'm actually a neighbor with these people, who tell me every time
of your best
that
friends
if
are Arabs,
a Palestinian
right?
authority,
Some of your best friends
excuse me,
are Arabs,
please let me finish. Please let me finish. Please, Ali, please let me finish. I want to make an important point here, which is that what Arabs actually on the street, not people who make money from pushing the two-state solution, but Arabs on the street tell me that if, God forbid, a Palestinian authority would take over their area in Jerusalem, they would move to Gilo or to Haifa, a place where they can live normally. When Ali Abu Nima talks about Arabs being persecuted, I hate seeing that. Okay, he may make fun of it, but you know what can I do? I'm sharing with you my heart. Look, you can make fun of it if you want, but the truth is that we have a heart for the Arab people and for the Palestinians. We want to see them live normally. We don't like these walls. We suffer from it ourselves. And the bottom line is that the Arab peoples in this region are suffering greatly. There's maybe been 100,000 Palestinians murdered in the last 2 years.
Well, let's just get to one last particular point before we run out of time here, if I may, Yishai Fleischer. I want to go to Ian Black and just ask him one very quick question, and that is, are we going to see greater pressure from the Europeans and from the wider international community? Is this the first step?
My expectation is that over time, international impatience with the status quo between Israel and Palestine will continue to grow. The Europeans are constrained to some extent by divisions between them and by constant appeals to them from the United States not to do anything to endanger the attempts to revive the peace process. John Kerry is doing that right now, and I think they held off in some of this activity out of deference to the Americans. But I think if the picture doesn't change, if the status quo remains, we will see the sort of issues outlined in these rather dry regulations become more and more prominent, and Israel will find itself, as many Israelis recognize, unlike your guest Mr. Fleischer, that there are serious dangers to the to the international standing of the State of Israel, the economy, and so on and so forth. So I think that, yes, we will see more of this
At that particular
thing.
point, Ian Black, we have to come to an end of this discussion and Intractable One. But thank you to my guests, Ian Black, Ali Abu Nyaima, and Yishai Fleischer, and also Sandra Duval. And thank you very much for joining us on this edition of Inside Story. If you want to send us your feedback, why not visit our Facebook page at facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. I'm Mike Hanna. Thanks for watching. Goodbye for now.